we're going to start with a guy who I think is one of the most interesting people in all of sports today. Joe Pompliano is host of the Joe Pomp Show on YouTube. He's the author of the Huddle Up newsletter, which has over 120,000 subscribers and readers. It comes out 3 times a week. And unbeknownst to Joe, he has been shadow producing an awful lot of my show for years now. He has generated so many interesting topics and things that I want to talk about with you. And we finally get to bring in the man himself right here today to talk about a few things that I want to pick your brain about. Joe, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction. I love the line about taxes. That seems to be very important, specifically this time of year. You're
going to want to pay those. The bill always hits the dinner table, so you might as well just get it done. I really mean it. I get more ideas of things to talk about, nuggets of factoids that make my brain start running in certain directions that become hours of content on not only the YouTube show that I'm hosting now, but this goes back to all my days and years in radio. Joe, I've been consuming you for, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. I'm one of your first adapters, let's say. I don't know how I found you either on Twitter or YouTube years ago, but I've been following for a really long time. And I do think that you're about as interesting as anybody else on planet sports on the internet. I really do. So congratulations to all you've built. For those who may not be as familiar with you as I am, you've got an investment background. You were a broker, a banker, a trader. Tell me a little bit about how you got to where you were and then the pivot into full-time sports.
Yeah, so I grew up loving sports like many people. I have 4 brothers, 5 of us in total. Played everything you could imagine from basketball, football, baseball to ping pong, air hockey, video games, stuff in the yard, the whole 9 yards. And at first, I wanted to be a professional athlete. You realize pretty quickly that's not possible. Then I pivoted to the next best thing, which was a sports agent. I interned at a company called Octagon Sports Agency, which represents Stephen Curry and a bunch of other big name athletes as well. And I realized pretty quickly there too that that's a really difficult business to break
Brutal
into.
Business.
It's so hard. Yeah. It's just like, there's a handful of guys that are basically controlling the whole market. And the only way you're ever going to break through is if you either know someone or you're willing to work your way up for like 25 years. So I pivoted from there again, and I said, I'm going to go work in New York City in finance. So I got a job out of school. I spent, I guess, like 6 or 7 years at JP Morgan in New York City. I was on the fixed income team, so trading bonds for wealthy people in wealth management. Fun job, interesting job, paid well, didn't really love it, right? It's like you're sitting across the desk from people who are 50, 60, maybe even older than that. And they're doing essentially the same job you are. It's a very structured career path. And that's great for some people, but I just thought to myself, look, I got to get back to what I want to do. And I literally just started, like you said, I was tweeting, I was writing this newsletter. And that was, I guess, 4 years ago now at this point. So things have escalated since then, and I've been able to do this stuff full time. So I still do quite a bit of investing on the side, maybe about 15, 20 different businesses a year from an angel investment perspective. But the majority of my time is spent on the content stuff in sports. It's media rights, it's athlete investments. It's, like you said, the most interesting things I could find at the intersection of sports and business.
Well, and I think that your, personal working knowledge of how money works, how money grows, how money vanishes, how money moves, gives you a real leg up on the topic that you've chosen. And did you ever think that business of sports would move like to the center of the TV quite the way it has? Like, I always thought that the business of sports were that was the branch that only the like people like me go out on. I never thought that the sports business segments I did would be as consumed and listened to as just me talking about, hey, last night, Curry was 8 for 11 from 3 points. But people are fascinated with this. And I just think people are always fascinated with other people's money.
Yeah, it's so interesting because people always ask me what I think about other companies or authors or individuals in the sports business space. And I always say, like, I don't look at them as competitors because they're basically raising all of the profile, right? When I started doing this a few years ago, like you said, even 4 years ago, no one really cared about sports business. It was like this weird subculture of the internet that kind of, professionals or people within banking or other individuals like that were too
dorks.
Yeah, exactly. It was nerds, right? And no, it really was though. And then now it's blossomed into this area where everyone seems to care about it, right? And certainly there's some of it that's still a little bit too detailed, but I think that's where I've been successful, is being able to explain things in a way where the average sports fan or the casual sports fan now cares about sports business. Whereas beforehand, they didn't care at all about sports business. They didn't care about media rights. They didn't care about cable. They didn't care about any of that stuff. And now it's really brought us to the forefront. I think that's benefited everyone that works in sports business.
So the proof that the NFL is the biggest sports business being done in America will be on full display next week when we watch a list of names being read and guys walking up to a podium with the same amount of scrutiny and intensity that we would apply to a playoff game. Did you ever think, has the NFL officially become too big to fail? Is it insulated from just about anything?
Yeah, I mean, the NFL is at a point now where they can do just about everything or anything and get away with it. If you think about the NFL at scale, they'll do about $20 billion in revenue this year. And just to give you guys a little bit of context of what that is, that's the top 5 biggest soccer leagues in the world. We're talking Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, etc. If you add all 5 of their revenues up, it's less than the NFL, right? So everyone talks about soccer and how big it is. And don't get me wrong, soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, is certainly a much bigger sport from a global perspective. Way more viewers. The World Cup gets over 1 billion viewers. It's massive. But from a pure monetization standpoint, the NFL has such an advantage because they have a stranglehold on America, which is the world's largest economy. So the NFL draft is the perfect example. If you think about it, at its core, we're literally watching the commissioner read names off of a list. And that's why at first the NFL didn't even think anyone would care. When it happened, one of the interesting facts about the draft is that the ESPN wanted to broadcast it because they had launched this new channel. It was sports 24/7, and they needed content for it. So they went to the NFL and said, hey, we would love to broadcast the draft. The NFL said, this is stupid. No one cares. We're literally just reading a name off a list in a hotel room. They convinced them to do it. They brought in a couple analysts to dissect the draft picks. And now this year, or at least last year, there's over 10 million viewers for the first round of the NFL draft on television. That's more, I mean, the numbers for the Masters, the final round just came out. It had less than that, right? So if you think about it in the context of what that means for sports, we're literally watching someone read names off a list, and it's getting 10 million viewers on television. Not to mention everything leading up to the draft, the mock drafts, the television, all that kind of stuff. It's absolutely incredible what the NFL has built. And to your point, I think it's only getting bigger. We're now going to cities to host them in individual cities. There's hundreds of thousands of people showing up to the event. It's massive, and it's only getting bigger.
I remember when Roger Goodell went on record about a decade ago saying, we'd like to be a $20 billion a year revenue business. And people collectively kind of chuckled at that and said, well, it's nice to have big dreams and all, but, don't break your shoulder trying to reach for that. And here they are. The proliferation of streaming has obviously been a great revenue source for football, and gambling has been a great now revenue source. The strangest bedfellow we ever thought we would see in the same bedroom with sports is now there every single moment, and it's becoming bigger and bigger. And Joe, I actually think that might be, the poison feed that could kill the golden goose. If you ask me, the one thing that could actually erode the NFL's popularity, it would be a scandal.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on sports gambling in general in sports, and most of it revolves around the fact that America is escalating at a point of almost no return, whereas virtually every other country that has had access to sports gambling for decades now is trying to retreat, right? If you think about Europe, and specifically the Premier League, they disallowed or are going to disallow gambling sponsors on the front of the shirts. It's because there's become this widespread gambling problem throughout certain countries around there. And I think America is sort of headed in that direction. If you think about what's happening largely, it's a lot of these leagues and the owners are worried about TV rights. You mentioned it, with cable declining and streaming is taking over. It's to be determined if we're able to transition the same audience from cable to streaming. And if they show up and if they pay the same bills, and if those streaming companies are willing to pay the NFL the $110 billion that they just got in their last media rights package. So in lieu of that, what they're doing now is they're trying to offset some of that potentially, or even escalate revenues even higher with sports gambling. And I think to your point, we've seen it with baseball over the last few weeks with Shohei Ohtani and how much that has garnered. We saw it in the NBA with Jonte Porter. These are legitimate concerns that could ultimately impact the integrity of the game. And I think outside of sports gambling, the integrity of the game is ultimately what could harm some of these leagues, and specifically the NFL.
Yeah. Leave it to America to find something else to run into a little bit too fast and sprint right into the center of the sun and then complain about getting burned. It's kind of what we
Yeah,
do.
I mean, I was always on the ledge of we should legalize sports gambling. People should have the option to do what they want to do.
Right. I have
But I
no
think that
morality claims in it at all. Zero.
yeah, exactly, right? Like if you want to do it, it's the same reason why people play the lottery, right? I think I read
Right.
something the other day that the average American spends like 400 or $500 a year on the lottery. Like that sounds insane to me,
Yeah.
but you can do what you want to do. It's your money. So that's kind of where I put that. The difference to me is I don't think I expected, and I probably should have, how aggressively this was going to take over the sports viewing experience. If you think about the NBA, they launched an NBA League Pass a few weeks ago, or they're going to be launching the ability to bet directly from watching games, right? So you can see it on the screen, you'll see the live odds, you can click through, you go to DraftKings or FanDuel, and you can execute a bet. No one asked for that, right? Who wants that? No one asked for that. If you want to bet on a game, you just do it on your phone. If you're a heavy sports gambler, you know how to do it. You're watching the lines, you're watching the games. To integrate it within the broadcast is like a step too far to me, right?
Right.
You have kids watching the television. I don't want to see that. The commercials are more than enough right now. I'd like if some of those got eliminated. And even attending games. I mean, you see some of these baseball ballparks they have in stadium sports books now. Same thing's happening at NFL stadiums. And it's becoming like a little bit too much. But again, it was bound to happen to some degree given the capitalistic nature of some of the owners in the leagues.
It feels like games are going to have to come with disclaimers, almost the same
Yeah.
way they warn you about how smoking could be bad for pregnant women right on the side of the carton. You're
Yeah.
going to have it. We hope you enjoy Warriors and Kings from Sacramento tonight. But remember, kids, gambling can become a big problem in your life. And I could see that being baked in the same way we get warnings about like insensitive scenes from old Disney movies. Like this could trigger you. I think we might actually end up seeing that. Your background, again, in finance gives you intimate knowledge of how big money moves. And since we're talking about gambling, this is where I'd like to ask you about Shohei Ohtani, because I know that you've covered this story very closely. It's fascinating for a lot of reasons. What I don't understand, and I do believe there is an element of victimhood to Shohei Ohtani, but I just don't believe this whole. And he found out with 100 yards left to go in this marathon what was really happening. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You got two completely different stories on record. That is a fact. We went from $4.5 million to $16 million in the blink of an eye, and that's just the money we know about. I would love to know what kind of action he's laying in Japan that we don't even know about, if this is what has happened. And because I'm, here in the Bay Area and in San Francisco, I'm not an incredibly wealthy person, but I know some wealthy people. And they have family offices. And I know you're very familiar with family offices. Basically, the ultra rich don't bank like you and me. The ultra rich have their own handlers. And like, this is our family's banker. He works for no one else. He just manages and controls our money, our investments, our everything. I can't believe that Shohei Ohtani didn't have someone in this process draw his attention to what might be going on just from what I know about family offices.
Yeah. So I've changed my tune on this a little bit, and I'll explain why. When it first came out, I was very similar in that thought process. I thought this story is total bullshit. I thought the more likely scenario was that they told the truth initially, that he paid off his friend's gambling debt, and then they found out that that was illegal to wire money to an illegal bookmaker. They retreated that story and said,
Right.
no,
That
he
also
stole
is
the money.
exposure. So
Yeah, right. So my thought was that, okay, you guys actually told the truth initially. Now you're backtracking because lawyers got involved and told you not to say that. But then we had the Department of Justice report. And what I think the Department of Justice report proved was that Ohtani is more than likely innocent in this. And I'll explain why. Number one, the Department of Justice and the FBI and the associated authorities have no reason to cover for Major League Baseball. There's no incentive for them to do that. So there's some theory going around that Major League Baseball just wants to swipe this under the rug. And again, I would normally prescribe to that thought process, given how big Ohtani is relative to what's happening with Major League Baseball.
We're cynical. We know how the world works.
Yeah, well, we're not idiots, right? Like that could definitely happen. So I'm not saying it wouldn't happen, but I just don't think that there's a reason for them to do that given what's going on. The second part of this is that Ohtani gave up his cell phone and his electronic devices, so his computer, directly to the FBI immediately when they started the investigation. Supposedly that was the first thing that he offered up. In my opinion, you don't typically do that if you're innocent. I think we all remember when Tom Brady smashed his cell phone when Deflategate was going on. Like he said, this is this is something that I do every year, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but you guys get the point, right? You don't give up your phone and your electronics if you're guilty because you know that they'll find something.
Just having to put in your credit cards to all your apps again means
Yeah,
you're not going
is
to do
enough,
that.
right? So, but what did they find? They found that they had never exchanged a text about gambling before, him and Mizuhara. They found that he had never visited a sports gambling website ever on the history of his cell phone or on his computer. They found out that he had never even logged into the bank account that was in question, right? And I think what this largely speaks to is just how disjointed some of this stuff is with professional athletes, right? If you think about Ohtani, he's about as big as you can get. I mean, this guy's going to make over $1 billion throughout his career, potentially halfway through his career from endorsements and baseball contracts. And you're telling me that his financial advisor and his agent just believed that one of his biggest accounts they should just not touch, right? Not even from like an insight perspective, but a taxes perspective, an investment perspective. Like, did they think the guy was paying taxes? I don't know, right? Like that seems like something they would be watching. So again, there's still a few things here. But ultimately, look, the DOJ found that they had recordings of Mizuhara calling the bank, pretending to be Ohtani, getting access to the account, disabling notifications, using his unique ID to log into the business to transfer accounts. So like, it feels like there's a lot of evidence pointing to that he's probably not involved here. All signs also indicate, given former players talking out, that Mizuhara might have been a little bit sketchy, right? If we want to say that, versus Ohtani, who by all accounts, again, is a nice guy and doesn't have
Very
any involvement
warm
in
and
stuff.
approachable.
Yeah. So there's all of that playing into it too. But I think this story was so captivating because of what's happening at a larger scale in sports. If you really look at the rules, what Ohtani did, if he did what he was being accused of doing, which was betting 19,000 times on sports, it's not even illegal if he was doing it through a legal bookmaker, right? Because he never bet on baseball. So I largely don't think people would even care if it was done through legal operations. I mean, he's allowed to do that, right? But I think at a larger scale, what upsets people is that it doesn't seem unbelievable for this to happen when Major League Baseball has sponsorship deals with FanDuel and DraftKings, and you go to a ballpark and you can go into a sports book there and make bets while you watch the game. Like when you integrate yourself so much with the league, it becomes much more believable that, to your point earlier, many more of these allegations and these scandals are going to continue to happen. If you think about even just last 6 months, we've had the NBA one, we had the Ohtani one, we've had a few NFL players getting suspended. We had a college baseball coach at Alabama get fired because he was fixing games with a buddy. Like this is going to continue to happen because this stuff is more accessible than it's ever been before. And I think Ohtani is just another example of that.
I read the DOJ, well, not all of it, but more of it than I probably should, thanks to a link that you provided on your Twitter page, Joe. And the one thing, and look, as you do read it, Ohtani's innocence does grow. It really does. It really does. And it seems like he was, a victim here more than a culprit. It wasn't like this guy was making shadow bets for him. But the one place that this just still sits fishy with me is this. Let's say you and I work together every single day for about 4 or 5 years. We're spending 20 hours a day together. And over those 4 years, you do something 19,000 times that you're doing like you're a little squirrely about it. You're protecting your screen or your phone. Like at one point during 19,000 transactions, I'm going to lean over and be like, Joe, what are you up to? What are you doing over there? What are you hiding?
I saw someone broke it down and it was like, it was like 8 bets an hour for 3 years straight based on how much he was sleeping, which is just insane, right? I mean, sometimes he was betting $10, which for someone who's also betting $100,000 is obviously a sign of a gambling problem. So look, I totally get that. The guy's with him 24/7, essentially. It seems like this would have come up at some point. But he obviously had an addiction. And I think the other thing that maybe pointed to some of his innocence was the fact that in one of the reports from the DOJ, it was talking about how the bookie had texted Mizuhara and basically said, hey, I'm outside Ohtani's house. I see him walking his dog. I'm going to approach him and ask him where you're at. Right. And if Ohtani was in on it and making the bets,
movie, by the way, that's where we're going to start the TV movie with that scene.
That scene right there is gold, right? You bring that to a producer, you're getting money in that movie funded immediately. But yeah, I think that there was enough in there to indicate to me that Mizuhara has a big problem. He probably lied to a lot of people, including not only Ohtani, but we've now learned his wife, his family, other people like that. And this is ultimately going to be a huge learning lesson for Ohtani, which sucks. You lose $16 million. That's a lot of money. And to give people context, $16 million doesn't sound like a lot of money to someone like Ohtani, but this guy, he really didn't make that much money in salary in Major League Baseball. Now, let's strip away the $65 million in endorsements. That's obviously huge, but he's getting paid $2 million a year with the Dodgers. Plus, he only had 1 year after arbitration with the Angels to where he was making $30 million. Every year other than that, he was making $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, $5 million. And that money was being funneled into this one specific account. So that means he was virtually just living off endorsements. Again, he probably had no idea where his money was given the financial advisors and stuff like that. But every dollar that he made in Major League Baseball is basically gone, right? Because he really didn't make that much money out of the pure contracts. So again, he's going to be fine. He's going to make $1 billion in his career. And this is ultimately going to serve as a learning lesson up front. Tighten up your ship, get someone else in control of your accounts. I imagine his financial advisor is probably going to get fired. But ultimately, it's just going to serve as a lesson for him to take things a little bit more seriously and keep an eye on things and maybe not trust some people that he previously did.
Joe Pompliano here on the Damon Bruce Show. I'm an old habit guy. I'm a radio guy. I'm going to reintroduce you during the middle of a segment, just out of habit. I can't shake it. I want to talk about Caitlin Clark and the economy that she is turned into. Obviously, she'll never make Shohei money, but she's one of the few athletes in America who can say she moves the needle more than he does even. As she moves to the WNBA, where do you think her considerable business power will be felt the most? In the attention and revenue drawn to the NBA, or the lack of attention and loss of revenue that women's college basketball could go through without her?
I think it's both, right? I think we're going to see the women's viewership go down a little bit, specifically talking about the NCAA March Madness final, right? That was just a tremendous number. I literally wrote about it before the tournament started and people laughed at me. I said, I think that the women's number can actually do more than the men's. And there was some like fundamental
5 years ago, unthinkable,
but even almost unthinkable before the tournament started, right? I literally had people responding to the newsletter, calling me crazy, calling me woke, saying all this shit, right? And I'm like, this is stupid, right? Listen to my argument. And my argument was simple. It was that women's basketball had amazing storylines this year. And the storyline was, think about Iowa specifically. Obviously, Caitlin Clark is returning for her final run at trying to win a championship, staying home at Iowa rather than going to a big school. That's a great storyline. Everyone loves her as a player. But then the people she was facing, right? LSU, rematch of last year against Angel Reese, great storyline.
Right.
UConn, who she wanted to go to, but they chose Paige Buchers over her. Great storyline. Then South Carolina in the championship, an undefeated team who had won 79 of their last 80 games, with the only loss coming to her last year in the Final Four. Amazing storyline again, right? And those were things that you just didn't get in college basketball because the best players are churning after a year or two and going to the NBA. So not only did you have great storylines and stars, which I think are the two most important things in sports, but there was fundamental differences with television, right? If you think about cable, which the women's game was on Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m., versus the men's, which was on TBS on Monday night at 9:20 on the East Coast. Like that alone provided enough fundamental of a difference to where I thought that it could overtake it. And it went higher than I thought it did. Even the Final Four games were higher than I thought it did. So I think we'll ultimately see that drop a little bit, but I think we'll settle in somewhere better than we've been for the last 2 to 3 years. And then if you think about her going to the WNBA, I mean, we've already seen it. People are joking about her salary last night on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, and saying she gets paid $75,000 a year. She's lucky she's not in New York City. She wouldn't be able to afford to live and all this stuff. And some of it's jokes, but some of it's serious, right? And the WNBA owner for the Indiana Fever is going to make her salary back on the first home game alone and through season tickets and everything else. So I think financially, the league's going to do better with her there. We saw that they're going to get 36 out of their 40 games on national television. It's going to be tremendous for the league. They're in the middle.
Warriors. It's like peak Warriors.
And it's the perfect time, right? Because they're in the middle now of going out to negotiate a new media rights deal. They're trying to do it separately than the NBA. And I don't think it's going to, 4 or 5x it, but if they double it or if they triple it, that's a tremendous outcome for all the other players. And I think that's part of the reason why you saw the Indiana Fever teammates of hers last night celebrating so hard when she got drafted. It's like Messi going to Inter Miami, right? Everyone else on the team benefits because all eyes are on you now, right? If you play well, You're going to make more money. You're going to get sponsorship deals. And I think it's ultimately going to happen with the Fever too. And she's going to make most of her money on endorsements anyways, right?
Right.
State Farm, all these other companies are going to continue to sponsor her, mostly because of what she's become online and on social media, rather than the viewership of the games. That's almost negligible here in the grand scheme of the impressions that she's able to provide to some of these brands.
Well, and the truth is, even though the salary that she'd be taking home from playing basketball is minuscule compared to elite NBA salaries, all those guys making those elite NBA salaries are still dwarfing that number in their off-court business and their endorsements. So it's funny, even though she's in a much different boat, she's in the same boat, and she's the first woman to really ever get into this boat as a basketball player. And how about this? I am no fan of women's basketball at all. She caught my attention. And I think that speaks to the power. We always talk about how important it is. Representation is out there. Representation matters, and it does. Familiarity matters. And that's why I think the women, you cited the perfect storm of all the story points coming together for the Final Four. But beyond that, you were familiar with her, other players, if not the players, the team's story arcs and whatnot. And
it had been building for 4 years, right?
Which
Which was my point. You don't get that in men's college basketball today because of the structure. Not only are most of the players international, which I think, to be honest, is part of the reason why NBA ratings have declined a little bit, is because there's less familiarity, right? Like, let's just be honest. Americans traditionally want to root for American players. And I think that's part of the reason why she's been successful. And part of the reason why the WNBA could be more successful is because we have a familiarity with these players through college. And as they go to the WNBA, then you become a fan of that team potentially, right? It still has a long way to go. And I think it's an uphill battle, but you could see there's kind of seeds there for it to become more popular.
I saw the news this morning. We've already talked about it a little bit. The Masters Sunday ratings tanked. I also saw on your Twitter page that the first round did wonderfully. The second round had a 69% increase from 2003. So how does the Masters go from up nearly 70% in round 2 to down more than 22% in a final round that offered us pretty good back nine drama and as good of a leaderboard that you could have without the name Tiger Woods being on it?
Yeah, so let me try to break this down in the simplest sense possible. And this is a good indicator of how numbers can be a little bit misleading, right? And I've seen people talking about this, and the narrative online right now from what I've seen today is that, the fracturing in golf is ruining the sport and everything like that. And I agree with that to a degree, right? I think LIV and the PGA need to come together, and the best players need to be playing in tournaments more often. And that's elevated the majors, and I would have expected a better number. But I'll give you a reason, and I'll go day by day. So on Thursday, the number was up compared to last year. The primary reason I think that the number was up was because Tiger Woods had a late start that day, and his entire round fell in the ESPN window, right? So nobody was watching it on the Masters app. They went to ESPN, who had the rights to go watch Tiger's final round. Tiger still moves the needle. We get that. I think most people would agree that makes sense why the number was up compared to last year, where he went off not on the broadcast, or at least most of the round wasn't on the broadcast. So that makes sense. Then we moved to Friday. Friday was a rain out last year, right? So it was plus, they had the tree fall, the wind, it was a rain out. I think that's another reason. Tiger was somewhat in contention. I think he was, he made the cut, obviously. So he was +1 or whatever after the first day. And people wanted to tune in to watch his second round. If you think about the final, the thing that crushed the final was last year was Easter weekend, right? So the number was pretty big last year because of out-of-home viewership. And you probably know about this, but maybe some people listening don't. Nielsen, the company that measures TV viewership, added out-of-home viewership to the metrics in 2020, I think it was. And this makes a considerable difference on holidays, right? The easiest way to think about this is it's people who are watching at a bar, at a restaurant, in a gym, at someone else's house. It's where you gather to watch a game. It's out-of-home viewership. They added that into the metrics in 2020. And that's why it seems like everything in sports is hitting a viewership record today. I mean, even the NBA is saying they're up, right? But the NFL is hitting records. Baseball is saying they're up. NHL saying they're up. Everything seems to be hitting record. College basketball, everything. And the Masters had a huge number last year because I think it was like 20 to 25% of that number came from out-of-home viewership. This year, it was less than 10% because it wasn't Easter weekend, right? So you're missing that whole bump, which I think made a considerable difference in the final round viewership. And I told people before the weekend started, the final round viewership is almost definitely going to be down outside of Tiger Woods being in contention, right? Because of that, it makes a huge difference to the overall numbers. So I think when you look at it compared to some of the things that are going on with the numbers year over year, it makes a little bit more sense. And maybe the numbers are roughly equal. But at the end of the day, it doesn't kill the main point, which is that Live in the PGA Tour, what's been going on over there over the last few years has obviously hurt the game of golf. Like, I don't know if do you watch golf?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the majors more than anything else.
Yeah.
I don't follow it like I do football or the NBA or
So
baseball.
the fifth major, though, the Players Championship, happened a few weeks ago. And the Players Championship was a fantastic tournament. It was probably one of the best tournaments I've watched for golf in a number of years, 5+ years. I loved it. Every second of it. I was glued to the television. It came down to the back nine. Wyndham Clark had a putt that lipped out literally to go force a playoff. Scotty Scheffler was warming up on the range. They told him, hey, you won. Fantastic tournament, huge prize, best players. That was down year over year. And I think that's the better indicator of where the sport is at, right? Because there was nothing funky going on with the numbers. It was a fantastic tournament with a great field. A good player won in a dramatic finish. And the number was down considerably from the year prior. And I always tell the story, before this season started for the PGA Tour, my wife's dad, so my father-in-law, came and visited. And he's a huge golf fan, plays all the time, watches all the tournaments, pays attention to the majors, all that stuff. And he told me, he said, this is the least excited I've been for a PGA Tour season in as long as he can remember, right? And I think the major part of that is, like, we had guys winning early on that no one knew, which, isn't a terrible thing. But like I said before, stars and storylines drive sports.
Right.
And the PGA Tour doesn't have it right now because all those live guys, the biggest names, the Phil Mickelsons, the DJs, the Brysons, whether you like them or you don't, they carry a lot of weight. And I think that that's why the Masters, the first couple of rounds, we saw a little bit of elevated viewership because people wanted to see them play together. And ultimately, we're going to have to find some common ground here and get these guys all playing together again if we want to see golf thrive. And the last thing I'll say on this is just the weirdest part of it all is that at a lower level, right, between you and I, on a recreational perspective, golf is growing tremendously. There's never been more golfers than there are today.
COVID was great for golf.
Exactly. Yeah. It's literally been growing as much as you could possibly imagine because of COVID, Topgolf, and other things like that. So you would expect some of that would translate to the professional level. But I really do think that them slowing down and not doing this merger like they previously discussed has really hurt the game. And I'm hoping that they're able to find something out, a solution of some sort, within the next couple of years here before people ultimately decide to not watch golf at all, really.
Joe, you pull all sorts of interesting information. I love these are just things that I find interesting about the Masters video that you put out before the tournament started. Lots of interesting stuff there. Every press credential's got a tag in it, so you're being tracked everywhere you go. I didn't know that. They are really, dress when it comes to how they're covered and where you might be while you're covering the Masters. But the single greatest fact that I think maybe you have ever produced was 850 private planes landed at Augusta for the Masters. Probably took over 1,000 planes over the entire 4 rounds of the Masters. The shortest flight came from Aiken, South Carolina. Somebody took a private plane 20 miles. Now, look, if you got a fastball, throw it. If you've rung the bell, have a great time. I'm not here to hate on the wealthy at all. The 1% are great, especially if they're your friends. No problem there. The minute that person's foot hit the tarmac, they should have been beaten severely. 20-mile private plane flight. That's the one scenario where the private plane probably took a little bit longer than just if you drove.
Yeah, I think there might have been some repositioning going on there, right? So like people who, can't land at Augusta, maybe they land there and then the plane goes there secondary. So there's potentially some of that going on. There were 6 flights. That's what makes me think that it was a little bit difficult to track where those flights were coming from beforehand using the dashboard. But you're right. I mean, it's a 30-minute drive. So the fact that you're going to drive to the airport, get on, fly, get off, then go to the course, you could probably just take a little bit more of a direct route right there. And I think, the Masters is a collection of some of the wealthiest people in the world, right? Celebrities, individuals, business owners, entrepreneurs, people like that, athletes that want to go because it's this elite event. event, right? And I think golf more than anything drives some of that. And then when you team it up with the Masters, which is kind of this secret tournament that does things differently and has this prestige to it, I think that drives a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't attend a golf tournament. So the 850, that was only Thursday and Friday too.
Okay.
If you count Saturday and Sunday, we're talking 1,500 private planes that are arriving at Augusta just for that tournament, which is an astronomical number. And it kind of makes me chuckle when, quite frankly, I go to get a coffee and they hand me a paper straw. I'm like, guys, I get it. I'm not against it. I'm happy to help and do my part. But when we got things like this going on here, I don't think my straw disintegrating halfway through the coffee is going to do much here.
Probably not. I want to wrap up with this because we'll bring it back to the NFL, and we're talking about an elite crowd coming in at an elite price. Boy, did you uncover something I thought interesting. Formula One, is growing rapidly in the United States. Maybe the only other contender to women's college hoops right now in terms of fastest growing sport in America. Maybe pickleball has fallen off a little bit here, Joe. I don't know, but the Miami Grand Prix generated 25% more ticket sales revenue in 3 days than the entire Dolphins home schedule. Holy shit. Because Dolphins tickets aren't cheap either, I mean, like that blew me away, man. It really did.
Yeah, I mean, when you break it down, it makes I think it's shocking, right? When I first heard it, I was like, holy shit, that's insane. Kind of your reaction here. When you break it down, maybe it makes a little bit more sense. They have 8 to 10 home games, depending on what they get for preseason. Those don't sell for much anyways. The Formula One race is 3 days, but they can fit 250 to 300,000 people in there. So just from like a pure numbers perspective, it makes a little bit more sense. But the shocking part to me is just the totality of the numbers. I said 25% because that's what he told me. But if we want to go on what they're probably making, the Dolphins in a season, it was a record last year. My guess is they probably did somewhere around $150 million in ticket revenue. To be 25% higher than that, that's $185 million in ticket revenue over just 3 days, right? So we're not talking about, the whole season or months long or anything like that. It's literally 3 days. And part of the thing that I talked to Tom with in the interview and on the newsletter this morning was just the idea of like the festivalization of sports. And I think Miami's done a really good job of this. And we're seeing this spread to other sports now, specifically outside of F1, which is just offering so many different packages. Tom made a really good point. And for those of you that don't know, Tom's the CEO of the Dolphins, Hard Rock Stadium, and the Miami Grand Prix. So he basically runs everything that happens in Miami there for sports.
Yeah.
And he made a really good point. He said when he got to Miami, there was 3 offerings. It was you could buy a regular seat, you could buy a little bit premium of a seat, or you could sit in a suite. That's all you could do, really. It was like 3 different price points. So for Formula One, what they've done a really good job at is they have 30 different price points. You can get a standing room only pass. You can get a grandstand pass. You can go to the beach club. You can go to the luxury club. You can do all these different things. They have 30 different offers.
Right. You can come in at the Sultan of Brunei level if you want.
Exactly. Right. And I think that's opened the door for just so many more people to attend. And I think what we're seeing now is that's going to spread to everything else, specifically inventory sports like the NBA and MLB that just have so many games. They're trying to get people in those doors. They're going to have more offerings now for you to come standing room only, for you to sit in a box and different things like that.
Joe, I think you're one of the most interesting guys on planet Internet. I really do. I love your work. Tell everyone who's watching now where they can find you. Tell them about the Huddle Up newsletter, Substack. I really enjoyed the conversation that you had with my pal, Ethan Sherwood Strauss, a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago. I think you popped on his podcast. 2 of the smartest guys, I think, in sports talking to each other. It's my kind of conversation. Where can we find more of you?
Thanks so much. And Ethan's a good guy. I had a good time with him. But you guys can find me. The newsletter's readhuddleup.com. It's on Substack. You'll be able to find it there 3 times a week. Sports business topics across every sport you could imagine. And then Twitter at Joe Pompliano. Easiest place.
Great stuff, man. Always really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on by. I'm glad that we could do this, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Tune into the Damon Bruce Show live on YouTube every weekday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific.